Actually, Gene Vincent contacted me in Dallas regarding his fan club. He had a Dallas fan club president called Bon Bon Bar, and he wanted me to help her, give her some tips about how to do a fan club. So that was how I met Gene Vincent, and he invited us to the Sportatorium, invited me to the Sportatorium where he was playing. And we went over there and we saw him. Of course, it was just crazily good. So that's how I first met Gene Vincent. He actually contacted me because my fan club for Elvis was very well known. We were in a lot of magazines and things like that. And since Bon Bon was in Dallas, and she had contacted me, I think it all tied together about the fan club. That's how it started.
How did you become part of a film called Hot Rod Gang?
Actually, I made the film Rock Baby Rocket before I made Hot Rod Gang, which, by the way, has become like a historical rock film because it was the second rock and roll film ever made. And when the producers in Hollywood saw Rock Baby Rocket, they were forming a company called American International Films. And that was with Lou Kimsey, who was the editor of Dig magazine, and then Samuel H. Nicholson and Samuel Arkoff. And they got together and formed American International and made all the crazy teen movies. I was a teenage werewolf, you know, the teenage flying saucers and all that. And so they were into making teen rock and roll flicks. And so Lou Kimsey, I had been writing for Dig magazine from Dallas, and he said, come on out to Hollywood. When they saw Rock Baby Rocket, they gave me a movie contract, told me to come to Hollywood when I was 17. And so we were going to make a bunch of rock and roll pictures out there. And so I did. I just, you know, packed it on up and rolled out to Hollywood, and with Mama. I brought my mama with me, of course. And so we made, the first movie they had lined up for me to make was Hot Rod Gang. And I didn't even know Gene Vincent was in it. And all of a sudden, you know, there was Gene Vincent, and we were so happy, you know. It was like, wow, you know. So, I mean, they came to my apartment in Hollywood, and I fixed spaghetti for Gene and the, you know, all the boys. And so my sister was there with me too, and they were happy about that. So that was an accident, the way I really didn't know Gene was going to be in that movie. But how great that I got to be in a movie with Gene Vincent. I mean, you know, that's a thrill. That's a big thrill and a lot of fun.
What are some of the fondest memories you remember of Gene in that film?
Well, in the film, you know, it was always work. The fondness, I think that when we were kids all out there in Hollywood, and I was 17, and they were young, I think it was just connecting with one another and things, people that we knew that we were friends with. I think there was like a camaraderie, because there we were in this crazy town in California, and none of us really knew anybody. So it was really good to be with him. The fonder memories are when he would come to my house in Dallas, and we would rock around the clock. I had some, you know, a lot of rock and roll parties and dancing all the time, and he was just a big cut up. And the fondest memories have to be with actually at the sport, listening to him perform at close range. I mean, there was absolutely nothing more exciting than a Gene Vincent concert. I mean, it was mind-boggling. With Elvis, the girls are screaming, so, you know, you don't get the music is clear. But, you know, Gene had to follow up. He was kind of brought in as a, you know, another Elvis or somebody comparable to Elvis. And it was like, that's a hard place to be for a person, even with a gift like he had, which was so remarkable. I mean, his voice was, I guess, really as good or better than Elvis, or certainly for its style, it was in its own category. And so the rocking that they did live was just unbelievable. And that's the fondest memories I have of Gene and his music. Because Gene was always kind of in pain. You know, he had had that accident early on in his life. And so when somebody's always suffering, you know, they're not going to be all that happy, you know. I always sensed there was a little sadness there. In his life, you know, you could feel it. But he was a perfect gentleman and very, very sweet and a lot of fun to be with. We would pack up the car, you know, with beer and hot dogs, and we'd go out to Grapevine Lake there in Dallas and, you know, build a fire and, you know, play guitars and just have a great time. Those were really good times. We always had great times. Yeah, following up on the greatest memories, I mean, I was so in love with Elvis at the time that it was hard for me to see anything even though I love Gene Vincent's music, you know, well, we really went crazy over Elvis. But one time when he was at my house in Dallas, I asked him to write something in, I said, sign my autograph book or my scrapbook. And when he did, this is what he did. He wrote to me. This is a copy of it. It's not the original thing. And it says, to Kay, to one of the nicest girls around, and if I ever get married, I hope it's to someone as nice as you. Love you madly. Really, Gene Vincent. Well, now that I'm older and I look at that, I thought, well, what was I thinking there? And this is a picture that was taken of us at that very time. It was just a great time. It was the beginning of rock and roll. We had the black rock and roll. We had Elvis. We had Gene Vincent. It was a time like no other. And we thought that all of our parents were the most square things in the whole world, and that we were going to save the world, and we were never going to be like them. And that of them, you know. So this was just a wonderful, free time to be a teenager, and there's nothing like it. And the only thing good about being this old is that you got to live through that. And if you were younger, you would have missed it, and that would have been a horrible tragedy for me, because it was the greatest of times, and I'll never forget it.
What do you remember, or what can you describe about the Blue Caps?
The Blue Caps were just a wired, happy-go-lucky bunch of rockers. Guys, very nice, polite, full of fun, always teasing and laughing between each other, making jokes constantly. And they were just like a barrel of monkeys. You know, when we were all together, we just had the greatest time in all the world. We were just a bunch of wild and crazy teenagers. But, you know, my mother was always, and I've always been a kind of person, we didn't allow a lot of wild drinking or anything like that. We had just clean rock and roll fun. And I would just put the record player on at the top, and we would just rock. You know, we would bop and rock and just dance a lot and just have a whole lot of fun. And, you know, that was a good, clean fun a lot of teenagers had in those days. It wasn't all, you know, crazy or drugs and things like that. We got into that. We were drunk on rock and roll.
Tell us, how did the film affect your career as a whole?
Well, Hot Rod Gang, you know, was just, at some point, I was 17 years old, and it just all became a big game for me. In other words, I wasn't really serious about a career. Everything that had happened to me had just fallen into my lap. I mean, somebody comes up to me I'm dancing at a movie theater in Dallas at a Johnny Carroll concert, and the movie producer comes up and says, will you do this dance in our movie? It's just like something from a storybook. And I just thought, oh, this crazy man, it's not real. And it turned out it was real. It was Hollywood people. They were going to make a film, and that's how I got in that movie. And then when they found out that I was in the Elvis fan club thing and that I'd had all that publicity, they made me a bigger role. And so long story short, I wasn't really trying to build a movie career or anything. I was just, girls just want to have fun. You know, I was just having fun and just riding whatever wave came my way. And that was a Hot Rod Gang. I mean, I thought, oh, all right, you know. I was very unimpressed with all that I was doing, and had no ideas for a career. And, you know, I met a guy out in Hollywood and fell in love, and I decided I don't even want this movie stuff. So, you know, to answer your question, I didn't leverage it. I didn't try to do anything to make another movie or do anything else. It was more like ho hum, yum yum. I want to say this, and this may sound extremely corny from Miss Rock and Bob, but I think that God has really helped me through all this, and I have to say that with a real genuine heart. Okay.
How and when did you meet Elvis Presley?
I had the great experience of meeting Elvis when I was like 17 years old in San Antonio, Texas, April 15th, 1956. And this happened to me because I had the honor to be the first fan club president of any size that had ever been formed for Elvis. And that was quite by accident. Happened when a top radio station announced my address over the radio and said that there was an Elvis Presley fan club, and it was a joke. And I went out and got all this mail out of my mailbox. Everybody wanted to join the Elvis Presley fan club. Well, there was no Elvis Presley fan club, but there were hundreds of letters. This was early on when Elvis was playing Texas. I was in Dallas, Texas, and he played all around Texas in all these little towns. because he wasn't real popular in Memphis and Tennessee because he was too rock and roll and they wanted hillbilly. So he says a lot of times that if it wasn't for Texas, he wouldn't even had a career. And I guess it's meaningful that his main fan club came out of Texas. And I was just the right person at the right time. My aunt was the secretary at KLIF to the president, and I was there, and the disc jockey came in making fun of Elvis Presley, this stupid guy, this crazy record. And I had already heard him on the Big D Jamboree on the radio. But I said, oh, he's going to be a great hit. And the guy was laughing, and I said, well, he is. And I said, I even have a fan club for him. Well, I had 2 sisters, so that was sort of true. And it was like, he said, oh, you do? And I said, yeah, I do. And so apparently he got my address from my Aunt Billy and announced it on his show, at KLIF, which is a top radio station. And then I got all this mail wanting to join the fan club. So I contacted, I had found a Sun Records promotional poster in the Melody Record Shop in downtown Dallas. It had I still got it, by the way. And you gotta love him if you still got a poster from that far away. But at any rate, I saw an address on there, and it was Bob Neal was his manager at that time. So I wrote Bob Neal, and I said, I need a fan club. I've got all these people, and they need cards, and they need pictures. And so I get this letter back from a secretary. It says, Bob Neal is no longer managing. He's been turned over to Tom Parker. You know, it was from Colonel Tom Parker's big office thing. And said, we don't have any facilities for Elvis for a fan club. He's just one of the new smaller attractions that Colonel Parker has. He just got him. It called him an attraction. And, you know, he has Hank Snow and the Carter sisters. And it was like Elvis was just this little side guy. So she said, the Colonel told you to do just anything you want regarding a fan club for Elvis. And I said, and I thought, well, that's very nice. And so I wrote her back and I said, okay. I said, what do I do? I mean, I asked my mom, what do you do? She said, well, you know, she said, the big thing about a fan club is that sometimes the fan club presidents get to meet the guy. And she says, I remember back when Frank Sinatra said that, you know, the fan club presidents always got to meet the guy. And I said, oh, you're kidding. I said, well, I have a fan club right now. So, you know, I went out and I designed the Presley Pink fan club card, which now is in Graceland. And the first one, is, you know, and had it printed. And answered all the letters. There was like several hundred of them. And I wrote back to Colonel Parker's office and said I've started the club and blah, 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 and printed the cards. So after a while, about a month later, I got another letter from Parker's office and said, Elvis is going to be in San Antonio on April the 15th. Would you like to go down there and meet him? I said, that's it. This is the dream has come true, the fulfillment of the dream. So San Antonio was like over 200 miles from Dallas, but they didn't know that in Memphis. So they thought it was right down the road. And I said, oh, I'd love to do it. Set me up. What do I need to do? So they sent me a telegram from Colonel Parker that said, this is Kay Wheeler, and allow her backstage at the Municipal Auditorium in San Antonio. So I got on a great, I happened to have a friend that lived down in San Antonio. Because I had lived there as a child, and I had like an old childhood girlfriend there that I could stay with her parents and her. My mother allowed me, so I got on a Greyhound bus, my white spike heels and my beige sheath dress, and I rolled down there to see Elvis all by myself. And that's why I like the song "Trying to Get to You." It's one of my favorites because that's the way I was feeling as I was rolling down the highway on that Greyhound bus. I thought, I'm really doing this, right? I had my telegram from Colonel Parker. It was like the magic key, you know. And so I go to the place where the auditorium is, and there's zillions of kids there, and I walk up to some policeman or somebody by the gate, and I said, I need to get in. Here's my telegram. It was a magic key. It got me through every single door. And so I got into the auditorium, and then there was Tom Diskin, who was Elvis's road manager and Colonel Parker's right-hand man. And by the way, a very gentleman, a very nice person. And I said, I'm Kay Wheeler, and I have the fan club in Dallas, and they knew who I was. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, Elvis is in there. Go right on in. It was like a dressing room. I said, just go right on in. Go right in. I said, boy, I don't know if I can do this or not. I think I was more like 16. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was 16, I think. And my heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour. So I go in and I open the door, and he's sitting there in front of a mirror adjusting his ducktail. Okay, he's doing his hair, and when I walk in, we're the only ones in the room. He spins around and he turns around and looks at me and he says, I said, I'm Kay Wheeler. I'm the president of your fan club. And I mean, I was like protecting myself, okay, because I didn't know what he was going to do. So he walks up to me and he looks at me up and down, and he takes his hand, he runs his hand down, up and down the sides of me. He says, baby, is that all you? And I'm about to pass out at that time, and I say, yes. And, and then, he just kind of, starts kissing around on me and everything, and I'm starting to freak out because I'm this very gentle, frightened to death teenager. And so we had a really good time in there, and he says, well, what do you want me to do? And I had some pictures. I said, sign them. I wanted him to autograph some things for me, and so he signed some pictures for me. And, we just started, kind of hugging around and kissing around on me, and I'm thinking, I'm going to pass out. That song, all I could do was stand there paralyzed. I mean, I was just paralyzed, and I just couldn't get into it because I was too frightened. So then the press came in and knocked on the door and, kind of interrupted the whole thing. But that was my first meeting with Elvis, never to be forgotten. In fact, here's one of the pictures of him. Here's one of the pictures of him at that time. That was taken that very day, so you can just see that we were just having a ball. And, he was definitely getting away with holy murder there, But this is a never to be forgotten moment, and we had some great times. I danced while he was during the break, while he was up on stage, and when he came off, he said, show me some of those steps, let's dance. And so we did a little dancing there while Scotty Moore played the guitar. So we did a little rocking and bopping there, and a little bumping and grinding. So that was my first meeting with Elvis Presley, and can it get any better than that? So meanwhile, while he was talking with the reporters, he kept his arms around me and, was pointing and giving them directions and saying, shoot it over here and move over there. And we were just together during that whole scene. And when they asked him, he said, are you going to get married, Elvis? And he squeezed me real tight. He said, why buy a cow when you can milk it through a fence? Well, that sounded horrible to me. And I just got froze up, right there on the spot. And so later when he went on the show, I was dancing in the wings while he was out there on stage, and he came off and he said, let me see what you were doing there, because I was doing some of my crazy wild and rock and roll, rock and bop. And so he said, show me how to do that. And so we did. We danced some, and Scotty Moore played the guitar for us, and we did a little dance scene there. And that was in San Antonio in 1956. And what a great way to meet Elvis. Does it get any better? In his early days, he did a lot of leg shaking, just mostly leg shaking and leaning back. Part of the rock and bop that I have is the heel-toe thing, and a little bit more swinging out the legs. And we did that, and that's what I showed him. But I saw later on it was incorporated. Whether he saw it on somebody else or whether that made the impact, who would know? I have no way of knowing that. But I did get a chance to dance with him and at least show him a couple of those rock and bop steps. And he got a little bit more elaborate in his dancing, and I don't know where he got that from, Jackie Wilson or some great black singer or somebody. I wouldn't take the credit for that, but I did expose him to what I do on my dance steps. At the same time, he was making Jailhouse Rock and I was making Hot Rod Gang. Just how crazy can life be? And none of it was planned. None of it was planned. It was just happened out there. And then Rock Baby Rocket is now in the history books. When they start talking about the beginning of rock and roll and films and all that movie, Rock Baby Rocket, that little movie I made, is considered the prototype movie of the 1950s for teenagers. So I thought that was kind of wild, and then my picture's in the history book there. It's kind of exciting. I never thought I was going to make history. I don't know if that's a good way to make history or not. To be the prime juvenile delinquent of the time. Actually, when I was there with Elvis in San Antonio, I said, well, when you come to Dallas? He said, well, I can't, but Colonel says Dallas is too big. We can't get a booking there, but we're going to play Fort Worth. I said, Fort Worth? I said, you've got to come to Dallas. And he said, oh, no, well, Parker says we can't do it. I said, well, we'll see about that. And that was, so I came back to Dallas and asked my Aunt Billy, who worked at KLIF, radio station KLIF in Dallas. I said, how come we can't get Elvis in Dallas? She said, well, maybe if you had a write-in campaign with all your fan club members, maybe we could get him here. Maybe if enough kids write in and, you know, KLIF to the radio station. I said, well, we're going to do it. So we had a huge write-in campaign, and Gordon McClendon at radio station KLIF in Dallas, Texas, booked Elvis and they sold so many tickets, they had to book the Cotton Bowl because there was no place to put as many tickets as they had sold. So we were playing the Cotton Bowl. So this is when the press conference that my mother, you know, we gave him the portrait and we had some great times with him. And so they had this huge cyclone fence in front of all the people sitting in the Cotton Bowl so that they couldn't go out on the field. And Elvis, they had a stage right out in the middle of the football field with Elvis, you know, Scotty and BJ Fontana and his whole band. And I was the only teenager. Elvis said, bring her out on the field. I was the only teenager allowed on the field. There were some photographers out there. And there's a picture of that to this day, the State Fair of Texas. That was a big thrill because he jumped off the thing and was saying, you know, that's all right, little mama. And I was right there freaking out on the grass. He jumped down on the grass off the stage and on the ground. So that was a great thrill. I mean, I was like a 17, 16-year-old kid just having the time of her life, you know, and never to be forgotten. It was in the 70s or 80s that a book came out that all of a sudden I was pictured with Elvis. One of these pictures was in some big book that was a New York Times bestseller. And it had, you know, Kay Wheeler with Elvis and his early career, blah, blah, blah. It was one of those ones that I just showed earlier. So my mother said, this guy says he wants to write a book about you. And I said, Mother, I never want to talk about this rock and roll stuff. I said, it was frivolous. It's over. I've got a serious career. I want to write. I want to, you know, maybe practice law. And I don't, this rock and roll stuff just doesn't fit with my profile, you know, or my resume. And she said, well, keep the letter. She said, maybe someday. So when my mother passed away, I found the letter. And it had the guy's address and phone number. So I said, you know, she wanted me to do this. She wanted me to write my story about rock and roll and Elvis and the beginning of rock and roll and the movies I made and all the fun and growing up in Texas and what it was like to be there in those times. And I thought, I'm just going to call this guy. So, you know, with all the audacity of Kay Wheeler, I call this guy and he answers the phone. He said, this is Alan Harbinson. And I said, hi, this is Kay Wheeler. I said, you know, you wrote my mother a few years ago and you did a book on Elvis. And you mentioned something, you might be interested in doing a book with me. I said, so let's get together and do it. And so he said, that's a great idea. I'm going to be coming to the United States and I'd like to see you. So we did together with Alan Harbinson, we wrote a book called Growing Up with the Memphis Flash, which is the story of growing up in Texas, and it's how Elvis in his life, you know, intertwined and influenced my life. And, you know, Gene Vincent's in here and the whole story, the whole saga of the great times in the 50s. And my mother hooked that up. So she had a great impact on my life and we're still talking about it. I had the great privilege of meeting Gladys Presley in November of 1956 at Elvis's house at 1034 Audubon Drive in Memphis, Tennessee. The thing I noticed about her was she was in a extreme case of melancholy and sadness, and, you know, just seemed like she almost could have a premonition of what was going to happen to Elvis. She seemed very, very concerned, and she was real nice to me and, you know, said something, you remind me of myself when I was a girl, and, you know, we had some little camaraderie there, and she took me through the whole house and was going to give me Elvis's white buckskin shoes, which at the time, I thought, how am I going to get those in a suitcase? They're going to get everything dirty. And now they're under a glass case in Graceland, you know, and worth probably, you know, $500,000. But she was really, really sweet to me, and I felt like that she really had a real deep feeling that there was tragedy headed their way. And so I think she was really right on that, and unfortunately. But it's very few people that really had an interview with her that are still alive and talking about it. The last time I saw Elvis was at the press premiere of Jailhouse Rock in Hollywood, California. And I was there, and he walks into the room, and he really looks different. He doesn't look like the Memphis Flash, which was, you know, all flashy and full of pizzazz. He had on kind of a square-looking suit, and he looked lonely. And there was a room with probably about 75 people there, and he scanned the whole room, and he sees me way in the back, and everybody's sitting there waiting for him to say something, right? And he yells out as loud as he can, "Is that you, Kay?" Everybody turns around and looks at me. And I said, "Yes, it's me, Elvis. Hi." And so, this was our moment. And that was the goodbye. That was goodbye. And I felt like the way he was so anxious to see somebody from home and somebody that he knew from the old days, and then he got caught up in the Hezbollah. And, I had an appointment later with my husband-to-be. So I scooted out of there. One of the great things about having a mother like my mom was that she was an artist and she was very open. And when I wanted to have the fan club for Elvis, she thought it was a fun thing, where a lot of parents were totally freaking out about having Elvis Presley in their lives. They thought this was the end of their children. You don't realize that rock and roll was like marijuana or drugs or something horrible. I mean, the parents in the 50s were terrified that their kids were dancing to rock and roll. Terrified. They considered it the black music. This was a nightmare. And Elvis was the biggest nightmare of all because he was white and he was bringing it to everybody. But what made me very lucky was that my mom was so open and she said, "Oh, this is a great idea." And so I probably couldn't have ever done any of this if I hadn't had a mother that was at least somewhat understanding. And she really loved Elvis, and she got to meet Elvis at the Cotton Bowl and backstage at the press conference. And she also was an art teacher, and she decided that she wanted to paint an all portrait of Elvis, and she did that in 1956. He was not real big, not huge, big mega star, and nobody knew whether he was going to last for 6 months. People would say, "This Elvis Presley, he's going to last a good 6 months." So my mom did a portrait of him, and we presented it to him at the press conference at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas, October 11th, 1956. And she was there, and everybody was leaving, and she said, "I didn't get to meet Elvis." And Parker said, "Come on, Elvis, time to go." And I said to Elvis, I said, "Elvis, my mom wants to, she didn't get to meet you, and we presented a portrait." And he said, "Well, never mind, wait a minute, hold everything. I want to meet Kay's mama." And he came over there and talked to her and gave her an autograph. And that was just the thrill of her lifetime. And she was just a cool mom. And I never had to rebel or do anything because she was kind of like, say, if you just keep yourself good and okay and take care of yourself, I'm going to let you have some fun. So I didn't have to go underground. And I always told her everything, and she always knew what was going on. And that was my mom. Her name is Vivian, and she was just wonderful. And she still inspires me even though she's not here anymore.